All right, everybody, so we're coming back into session right now. And I would like to introduce a dear friend of mine. We've known each other for how long, Morayo? About 4 years
About
now?
4.
Yeah, about 4 years now. So Morayo is the wife of my best friend's brother, also one of my best friends. I was the best man at his wedding, Jesse Uchendu back there. But it's not about you, Jesse, okay? It's about Morayo today. Morayo is a very accomplished woman. She's a doctor. Whoop whoop. Congratulations.
Thank
you. Just finished her PhD dissertation. She just presented in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
And she is here to gain, to give us some insight into Black Hebrew Israelites. So without me being long-winded up here, this is Dr. Morayo Uchendu.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Landon, for just the invitation to come and share my testimony. So this is just overall my story about why I became a Hebrew Israelite and why I continued and why I left. So here's just a timeline that I put together and this is what I titled The Dangers of My Pursuit of Knowledge. So I started college, I attended Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is what they consider a historical Black college, and it's an all-female college. And I decided to choose this college because I was really interested in first, to pursue my knowledge. Spelman is like really a highly sought after college, and a lot of minority students attend. So I attended in 2007, and when I first attended, I was introduced to so many different types of people just throughout what they call the AUC, or the Atlanta University Center. It comprises of Clark Atlanta, Spelman College, as well as Morehouse College. So you were just swamped with so many different types of, ethnicity-wise, with, different people of color. I did get introduced to Hebrew Israelitism when I was talking to a friend, and this friend actually became a Hebrew Israelite within a year of me knowing him. So you imagine you introduce to a new friend, he's one way, and then all of a sudden he switches and is telling you that he's a Hebrew Israelite. So I was interested in learning more about Hebrew Israelitism because, as many of you may know, they are very articulate when they talk about the Bible. They seem as though they know the Bible from front end to back end. So I started to just go to their classes just to see what it was all about. And then I graduated from Spelman in 2012, and then I moved to Chicago to pursue further education. And then in 2013, I decided to move to Houston after just being in Chicago for 1 year, which I wanted to highlight. In Chicago, this is one of the hubs of Black liberation. So you have the main, what they call camps of Hebrew Israelitism. So you have one in Atlanta, you have one in Chicago, which is the major one. You have one in New York, you have one in Houston, just throughout all the urban cities in America, you will have a major camp of the Hebrew Israelites. So I moved to Houston, started graduate school, and then I realized that just based off of what they were being taught in Hebrew, just about the hatred for other people who are not Black, just this different types of interpretations of the Bible just made me compelled that, this is not something that the Lord is trying to lead me to. So I decided to stop practicing and really kind of fully embrace my identity in Christ. And I will try to kind of go into, why I became a Hebrew Israelite. Like I said before, I was interested in learning the Bible. And I was also quite rebellious in my upbringing. So I'm actually Nigerian. Both of my parents are from Nigeria, and I was raised in a very strong evangelical Christian household. And when I went into college, I knew my beliefs. I knew I followed Christ. But I was just trying to challenge, like, why don't I know this part of the Bible? And why I was still in a vulnerable place when it comes to my Christian faith. And I just really wanted to learn more. But when I became a Hebrew Israelite, I was just kind of like spewing all this knowledge to my mom and just like, Mom, did you know about this? Did you know about that? And she just kind of was just like, okay, well, I'm just going to allow you to do what you're going to do, but hopefully you find your way back to Christ. So I did wanted to prove my family wrong that I can actually stay a Hebrew Israelite for more than a year. So, and this is, I had identity issues. So even though I was like Nigerian, my culture was not really taught that much in the household. I don't speak Yoruba, so my mom is Yoruba. Both parents are Yoruba. Don't speak Yoruba, so it's like I don't really know my culture. I don't really know who am I? You know, my mom is Nigerian. I'm Nigerian American, but who really am I? But I kind of related to a lot of the Black Hebrew Israelites because they feel as though that, you know, they trying to understand who they are. They trying to understand their struggles. Like, why am I being oppressed in America? You know, why do Black people have the highest incarceration rates? You know, and that's something that I also wanted to bring about is that they reference Deuteronomy 28, which talks about Israelites and how, due to your disobedience, God is going to put all these curses on you. And so they would take this in context that this is us. We are the most oppressed people on this earth. So this chapter in the Bible refers to what they consider as, you know, being Black Israelites. And this picture is a very famous rapper named Kendrick Lamar, and he came up with a song where he now classify himself as a Black Hebrew Israelite. So being called Black or being called Negro, all other derogatory names, like, you know, that's not who we are. Our identity is, you know, we are Black Israelites. So he kind of, as long as other people in mainstream, well, don't know why I came back, recognize or trying to relate to, you know, a Black Hebrew Israelite. So now I wanted to just kind of introduce to you the different forms of Black Hebrew Israelites. There are two different extremes. So you have the very radical, militant Hebrew Israelites, and you will see these people actually in the street corners, at malls, shopping plazas, just kind of saying, you know, talking about the white man, talking about, you know, they're the oppressors, using the Bible to try to say that this is who the Bible is written by Black people, for Black people, and only for Black people. This is the type of derogatory stuff that they would say. I'll just use that as an example. So you have kind of two groups who really portray this image, and as you can see that you don't see any Black women amongst them. So they're pretty much comprised of Black men who actually are the ones who are teaching these type of hate theology. And then you also have what you call the Reformed Israelites, more of the conservative ones, the ones that will actually keep the Sabbath, which I will go into a little bit in the next slide. So there's a couple of classes or groups that will actually, who actually keep the Sabbath and actually follow the feast laws and other types of Old Testament laws. And they more of what they consider themselves as like Bible study groups. So this is a group that actually I was a part of, is, you know, called Israel of God, or IOG. And they have many different locations throughout America as well as internationally as well. So what does being a Black Hebrew Israelite entail? So of course it's keeping the Sabbath day, which is the seventh day of the week, which is on a Saturday. Pretty much it starts on sundown Friday and then ends sundown on Saturday. And for women, we are mandated to cover our heads, and also you cannot wear pants because that's considered as like an abomination. Whatever it tells for a man is for a man, and whatever is for a woman is for a woman. And additionally, praying towards east. So during the time of Israelites being in captivity in Babylon, they were instructed to pray always towards Jerusalem. So this was a practice that they adopted into their culture, is that even though we're in America, we still need to pray towards the east or pray towards Jerusalem. Additionally, it's keeping the dietary laws, which I hope is, okay, cool. A lot of these animals listed here that is crossed out is an abomination. So you cannot eat pork, swine, cannot eat different types of food that is listed here, shrimp. But the ones that are not crossed out is what you can eat, like beef and lamb and quail as well. Additionally, another big practice is keeping the Lord's holy days, which is the feast days that is written in the Old Testament. You can find in the book of Leviticus. So all of these different types of practices, they take from the Bible, and they try to say that this is what we need to continue to do because this is how we earn our salvation, is by doing these practices. And if there's any questions, I know that there was a couple of questions that was brought out in the earlier sessions. Just be free to ask. So why did I continue practicing Hebrew Israelism? So I felt guilty because I was starting to believe what I was being taught, but then over time I started to say question certain things that were being taught, and also stop believing on the way that it was being taught. And then I also had an issue with pride, and I felt as though I needed to prove to my family that I could still continue with this practice and belief. And I was teaching them so much different things, but if I just suddenly just stopped doing it, then would I look as a hypocrite amongst pretty much the people, the community that I was part of with the Hebrew Israelites, as well as, with my family, who I was suddenly, if I to say one thing that I am this way, and then all of a sudden I change it up, would I look inconsistent? And then I also had the community I was part of. This was the type of community that was very conservative, and they seem as though that they are trying to do the right thing, trying to obey the Lord's laws, but a lot of times, some of these laws were taken out of context, and some of what was being taught on the Sabbath class were, taken out of context. So I just kind of felt as though, still believing it, but then still liking the people there, but then knowing that there was something seriously wrong with me continuing with this belief. And so here, I just kind of sum up with why I discontinued. And like I said, it's just kind of having this unrealistic expectation of diligently keeping a lot of these Old Testament laws, such as the Sabbath, and then also laws about the cleanliness. And then now just disagreeing with a lot of the practices of, for instance, with the Hebrew Israelite men who also believed in polygamy and having multiple wives and having multiple families. So I think this will be a stopping point for me to ask if there's any questions. Yes.
In the year 2000, there were 220 million Christians in Africa. So outside of colonial rule, again, we're going to talk about colonialism today and the role of colonial missionaries, but outside of colonial rule.
Right. So it was also mentioned about the Trinity, how the Hebrew Israelites do not believe in Trinity. And I grew up believing in the Trinity. And now knowing that the Trinity exists, there is God, there's the Son, and there is the Father, the Son, and there's the Holy Spirit. And these are three different beings, persons. So now kind of going into what they use scripture that is not, that does not align with, or use that scripture to say that, okay, this is why the Trinity doesn't exist. I felt it was wrong. So I felt that kind of going through my upbringing and knowing what I was taught and still believing what I was taught, but then trying to hear about what they're teaching was creating a bit of an inconsistency or imbalance. So that's also a big influence of why I left. It was more so self than anyone else. So.
African, not in the sense that he created it, but as the books were being written, as false gospels were being written at the same time, the church was wading through. This is the process of canonization. That's a whole different class. But he was the first one, we would say, to get it right. Maps tell us so much. This is what...
Yes, that's actually a really good question. So in 2014, when I moved to, in 2013, I left Chicago and moved to Houston. My mom kind of noticed that like I was really changing to be this, totally different person than what she raised, and so she took it upon herself to move to Houston because like I was going through a lot of like psychological debates about, still the identity. Like I'm not really a Hebrew Israelite. I cannot claim that identity because that's not who I am. And kind of like her influence of actually moving because she felt as though she needed to kind of help me in this whole transition from moving to Houston, that she actually was very influential as well to help me with, kind of coming back to the roots that, she helped to establish. Yes, sir.
I think the only one to claim that status is Ethiopia and Liberia.
So as of now, I do not have associations with any of the people who are Israelites, but as far as repercussions, like I wasn't blackballed because I'm still getting like, Facebook messages from people saying, where are you at? Like what happened and everything. And I just haven't responded. But I just felt as though like it was just time for me to just kind of like isolate myself. And like over time, they kind of understood that I wasn't going to come back. But as far as repercussions about, leaving or no, I haven't. That's real.
Egypt of this, when they would start talking about, empires coming from the outside, and I go, whoa, that was not us. We too were colonized. We kicked them out. But we were kind of, we were parceled out,
Right. So in more of the reserved classes, the women were kind of integrated, but they cannot lead a class. They were expected to, have families. Like the role of a woman was quite different in those classes, and kind of like society-wise, they just felt as though the women did not have a place in the church or kind of had their places at home or domestic. So.
But often petitioned their governments to do more.
Yes, I think it did because like I was very educated, and so a lot of these men were kind of self-educated. So they kind of created that imbalance that there's a woman in this class that feels as though she's better than us because she's educated. We don't have educated like that. So it that did kind of come apart. When I was approached by some people in the class, about what really am I doing? I'm supposed to be actually married and produce children instead of like going after education. So that was like a really big pushback amongst a lot of the men here.
I mean, today it's really difficult. You have to kind of be trying as an American.
It was actually quite, because it's still part of like consider like a big network. It's just different locations, just the same type of teaching. So they already had all the classes already set up, what I call classes, or what they call like, their groups within the same organization. So they have it everywhere. And they even have some in UK, in London, Zimbabwe. So their reach is pretty expansive, international as well as, domestic wise.
Or they would leave if they might have children there. There was one missionary who had children in 3 different countries because, for whatever reason.
Oh, yeah.
Wives on the field. One missionary went crazy, sat out in the jungle for 2 months in a grave that he dug for himself next to his wife's grave. Okay, modern mission agencies would never let this happen today. And I would say for good reason.
Right.
For good reason. That's obviously not healthy. So for all of what I'm about to say about colonial missionaries, they did have the willingness to go and to stick it out and to endure hard things. The bad. Cultural imperialism. Mm-hmm. American missionaries, they were not just missionaries. They were also purveyors of culture. And I would say this still happens even to this day. A lot of times their gospel, even if they're not intending it to, is often infused with American attitudes, American ways of thinking, American ways of functionalism. And so sometimes the gospel doesn't come in just as this neutral nugget, this neutral deposit. It comes in wearing American clothes, speaking an American accent. And some of this is unavoidable. As the global church is now sending missionaries throughout, we can say the same thing.
Right, and that was kind of my whole processing as well is that, you know, through the transatlantic slave trade, like slaves were brought from every country, pretty much western side of Africa. And to say that, you know, that all through like the decades of slavery with intermingling with other ethnic groups, that there is still a pure group of people, Israelites. So that was kind of why I brought that up, and they will argue, well, you know, like how can you say that you know, that we cannot identify as this because of the curses. So they will still bring it back to Deuteronomy 28, even though they neglect to say that, okay, there's possibilities that we are mixed with a whole lot of different things, a lot of different ethnicities. So yeah, so I kind of agree with what you mentioned there.
When it started, Hassan al-Banna was the founder of this. He was an educator in Egypt, and he started schools in poor areas. And so the movement continued to have a focus.
Right.
But in India as well, Hinduism exists today as it does, as an ism, as clearly defined as it is, because of early Hindu thinkers' interaction with Western missionaries, where they were, because there was now a counter.
They do teach about spiritual Israel, so of course every other type of ethnicity is welcome as well, but they will say that the primary recipients is the blacks or African Americans. But they will also say that there is other races that can, or ethnicities that can actually be redeemed as well. If that makes sense.
Associated with them. So there are now denominations of Hindus that are also now leader. And so there's this religious resurgence. This happens in any time of exile. The Jews go into exile and they go, why did God send us into exile? Oh, we worshipped other gods and we sacrificed our children to Molech and we did this and we did that. Let's stop doing all of this. Let's start.
They feel as though that it has not been done away. So like the old covenant still needs to be practiced in order to attain salvation. So they don't really necessarily believe in salvation until you actually been resurrected, if that makes sense. Okay. Yeah. They don't really believe in that, like if you accept Jesus Christ as Lord, then you're automatically saved. They don't believe that, no.
Their own national and ethnic and religious identity, and to try to reimagine.
They take Christ as like a redeemer, but they don't feel as though he has redeemed you at the time that you say that you were saved, or that you claim that you are saved.
Colonialism, the colonial powers came
right, that you have to do all of these, the laws, keep the laws, in order to have a chance at salvation.
Right? We're going to translate hymns into tribal languages.
No, no animal sacrifices. No animal sacrifices. No. How are you forgiven?
We're the national church. You outsiders, y'all don't tell us what
like,
to do.
Because the old covenant was, that's how they did it, was
We have the power.
animals.
right, exactly.
Sacrifices.
Right.
And then the new covenant
Neither
is
of these
Jesus.
is helpful.
Right, exactly.
Right? Because
So,
But so all of the different types of feasts actually kind of represents Christ in a way. And so they believe that if you do these feasts, that you are accepting Christ.
feast, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I have no need of you. That's not a biblical attitude. But
I'm
it's
still a
neither
Christian.
biblical for them to have that attitude. I have no need of you.
Uh-huh.
So there's a lot of missionaries now talking about what does a brotherhood look like, where neither of us, it's not about power. It's about we're fellowshipping, walking together as brothers and sisters. And Jesus sets the agenda. We have, so let's think more theologically about this now. We have a global God. If you look at the Abrahamic covenant, we go, okay, God called Abraham,
No,
right,
it's
he's the father of nations, and Abraham was
No,
the
no,
rest of history. And we kind of truncate it like that.
Yeah.
But God gives Abraham a promise, and in the promise he says,
That's a really, I feel as though that's kind of my burden as to how can I reach this group? How can I at least be the light, so to speak? I don't have an easy answer for that, but I know that it's hard to really try to unlearn something that was learned, and try to help those who are kind of stuck in this belief that this is what I've been taught. Because people who are been in this group for years. Like they teach their children this, and they are as old as me or even older, and they still keep this in their families. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
30 other entire peoples that are spread from Egypt and across Mesopotamia, so modern day Iraq, Saudi Arabia, etc., that are mentioned in Genesis. In fact, there's probably more.
Oh, I see. For the group that I was part of, like we all were still in the same room listening to the same message. So it wasn't as though we had different sections. Women were also taught like the law, taught the Bible, and it wasn't as though we were like kept separate from men. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Completely overlooks.
Oh, it's okay. I'm kind of used
the
to
very
it.
first 20 pages of the Bible are. It's not about white or black or this or that. It seems that God is speaking, He is a global God. He is speaking of Himself in regards to all of the nations. The next thing we see is the Jerusalem Council. Obviously,
Yes, so I do have a good friend of mine who's no longer in the religion that, like, so for one, like being a woman speaking out was like prohibited. You cannot even speak like your own truth, I guess, during the Sabbath day. It's supposed to be laws, precepts, straight Bible. So like if you challenge some of this, like if you just simply ask the question, they look at you like, no, that's not what this is supposed to be. Or if you try to speak something that's contrary to what is being taught, like you are asked to leave. Like you cannot no longer fellowship with them. So yeah, so I know from her experience that, she did face a lot of backlash when it came to, trying to even address certain things, but yeah.
tribe and adopt all Jewish practices and fit a Jewish model for being acceptable. In order for Christ's salvation to be applied to us, we are saved apart from any works. We are saved apart from the law. And so we see early on in the Jerusalem Council, they had to come to a resolution.
Oh, I see. No, it's they don't that harshness of. They just don't associate, or they will say that you're possibly condemned if you go back to your old ways, so to speak. If you go back from actually being taught this, and then all of a sudden you don't want to like follow it. So that's kind of like just the separation of this person no longer is like for us or more. Yes, ma'am.
In various ways to these statues, walking distance from our church. And all of a sudden, we rescue this passage out from theory and it becomes practical. And so for the Jews, they lived in a certain context where their questions weren't the same as the Gentile questions. And they recognized this and they said,
yes, everyone is invited. And there is some form of chart that not this group that I was part of, but I guess another group, created where they try to say that different like nationalities of blacks, I'm talking about Caribbean, African Americans, maybe one type of tribe. So you talk about the 12 lost tribes. So they may say that, and don't quote me on this because this is totally wrong, but that Jamaicans, for instance, may be tribe of Gad, or African Americans may be tribe of Judah. So they try to say that, okay, different types of nationalities are one type of tribe. But they say that, well, all people are still welcome in their classes to learn about the Sabbath or to like learn about the different types of customs of the law. So, but they do have that type of, which I obviously disagree with, but. Yeah, they have
let's learn about Asian theology. Let's learn about African theology, Latin American theology, and then we'll just do a class on theology here at some point. And there's this sense in which our theology is.
Yeah, I think it's definitely made up because there's no scientific evidence that kind of like pinpoint those different types of ethnicities to a type of tribe. So that like I even tried to like research it and I did not even see how they came up with it. Thank you.